So when we started with this study, there's been talk for a number of years about keeping the harbor open or closing it. The reality is you can't, so quote unquote, close a harbor. It's not like turning off the switch and closing the door and you're done. There's a lot to it, and we wanted to look at something that was going to make sense in if the harbor can't maintain its current configuration, what else could it be? So that was the sort of the purpose that we were looking at with the sending out the Harbor Basin study proposal that we sent out. And in looking at the assumptions for this study, just asking on what Mike had indicated about the funding, we don't have a reliable source of funding. So therefore we're looking at alternatives that could potentially or hopefully be, to the extent feasible, both hydrologically and geologically self-sustaining, meaning once we have the configuration that we want, that we can do either less dredging or no dredging in the future. Second was that we definitely wanted to keep boating as a use. We did not want to preclude it. Realizing, though, that we may not have the full complement of accommodations for boats that we have now. We may be looking at just the non-motorized versions, but we want to keep that as an option. We also want to have the boat launch ramp, which is on the south side, also be functional for as long as possible, but it does need some improvements. And again, we don't have funding identified for those. We want the basin to be aesthetically attractive. I know the one thing that's come up over and over again when there's been discussion of boats going away is that we don't want stinky mud flats. The developer doesn't want that either, I can trust you. So we're looking at something that is both aesthetically pleasing to the landside development, but also for people who are out there day in and day out enjoying their time out in the shoreline. And lastly, we wanted to make sure that to the maximum extent feasible that this alternative maintained the water access. There's actually, it's still in draft form, but there's actually a water bay trail document, and San Leandro is identified as a key site in that water bay trail. So we want to keep that option available. The project understanding that we have, this goes over a little bit what Cynthia had mentioned, maintaining some form of boating and aquatic recreation. We want to look at potential revenue, which could offset some of the long-term maintenance costs associated with whatever the alternatives end up being. Again, something that can, to the extent feasible, be self-sustaining, and also coordinate this project with the master developer so that they're going to be melded together and be a cohesive master plan that council will be looking at. The work products that we are working with the consultant, and we're looking at 3 different alternatives but that are going to be both a narrative and illustration. In addition, we'll have a no-action alternative which will be described. And each of the alternatives, and this is the part that we haven't actually gotten to yet with the consultants, but that each of the alternatives are going to be vetted with each of these questions. Does it provide aquatic recreation? Is it complementary to the landside development? Is it sustainable? How difficult is it to obtain the regulatory permits? As Cynthia mentioned, BCDC can be a bit of a bear working with them on some of the proposals. What will be the cost not only to implement, but to maintain down the road? We want to make sure that we're not getting into something that commits us to a big maintenance budget. And then also, do we have anything that helps to generate revenue? So we have 3, and I want to emphasize these are preliminary. These are preliminary alternatives that we're still working on with the consultant on this. And I think when we started this, we really thought that this was an alternative study, meaning that we were going to come up with 3 or 4 alternatives. Everyone could look at them and pick, which is their favorite. As we've actually gotten into this, we actually see it now more as like a transition plan. so that if the harbor can't stay in its, its current configuration, what could be the next step that it could transition to? Maintaining, having some boating, and then if that's not possible, if dredging doesn't become possible at all, then what is it next transition to? So that we have sort of a smooth plan, and it's planned out for what the harbor could do. So with that, this would be the first sort of transition, meaning if the full dredge of funding was not available to do the full dredge to maintain the harbor in its current configuration. What this shows is, on the far right is, that would be the harbor area, so there would be berths there maintained for boats. And then on the left, up against the conference center, is a small beach area. Has lagoon paddle rentals. Vista Point has a pier to walk out on. The island that you see in the center there, the thinking with this is that we would do a partial dredge of the harbor to create this island, so that we then sort of take away the issue of having to dispose of the dredge spoils. And we figure if we do this, this could buy us, several more years of having a viable harbor for some of the larger boats. All right, assuming if dredging then could not be maintained somewhere down the road, the next step is what we're calling an aquatic park, where you just have more of the refuge islands. And I think the idea with this is that it's really going to be someplace that kayakers and people looking for the wildlife and the refuge area would be interested in. So again, it maintains pedestrian access around it, has the vista points, the boardwalks up at the north, but it makes it a little bit more interesting for those for the kayakers. I mean, the one thing we've sort of talked about right now from a kayaker standpoint, the harbor's not the most interesting place to go to, and this would create both wildlife habitat and something for active recreation that way. And then lastly, this just again builds on to the last alternative. When we discussed with the CAC when we were talking about this, I know a lot of people brought up having sort of a nature center and having a more focus on that. And so it's just building onto it, having more shoreline cover habitat, having the interpretive center that's there on the south end. So it's just bringing more of sort of, I guess, the learning scope into it, and having more habitat there for wildlife. Again, this would be available for kayaking, canoes and such. So at this point, I think what we want to do is break up into some smaller groups. If you could maybe, 2 rows could turn around and face each other, so you'll have groups of 8 to 10 people. And then what I'd like to do too is to have the CAC members that are here, you can try and make sure if there's a CAC member at each one of the discussion groups, and staff's also going to come along. And what we're going to do is if you can talk a little bit about the alternatives and also any of the financial data that you heard tonight. If you had questions, comments, and then we'll come back at the end and present what information people have.